Welcome to the Becoming Superhuman podcast, where we interview extraordinary people to bring you the skills and strategies to overcome the impossible. And now, here's your host, Jonathan Levy.
This episode is brought to you by my all-new Super Learner Academy, the home not only of the all-new Become a Super Learner 2.0, but also of my exclusive masterclasses and audiobooks, digital books, and tons of exclusive content only available to members of my masterclasses or my masterclass bundle, where you can purchase multiple courses and save a ton on getting all of that great content. So to check it out and to see all this amazing new content that we've recorded exclusively for Super Learner Academy, visit becomeasuperlearner.com and use the coupon code podcast to save. Greetings, Super Friends, and welcome to this week's episode. Before we get started, I want to read a review from a Mr. or Mrs. Gopi, who wrote on Stitcher, quote, "Highly recommended. This show has high quality content and great speakers, changed my life, and has improved my memory amongst other aspects of my life." Thank you very much, Gopi, for your review. I can't tell you how much it brightens our day and boosts our rankings, which helps us get the absolute best guests, like the guest that we are excited to bring to you today. That's because today we have a very special treat for you. We're going to talk about poop. Okay, just kidding. But actually not really, because today we have the founder and CEO of a company called uBiome with us to discuss the rapidly growing field of something called the microbiome. Now, you might be familiar with the microbiome, otherwise known as the 100 trillion with a T, bacteria and microorganisms living inside your body right now. And you might know a little bit about why that's important. You might also not. Fortunately, we will get into all of that in this interview. And plus, we'll talk about poop. So get very excited, people. My guest today has quite impressive credentials, by the way, from Stanford and Oxford to Clarendon and Fulbright Scholarships. She's worked at Google, McKinsey, Lehman Brothers, Grameen Bank, and many other places that would blow your socks off. She's spoken at TEDMED. She's been featured in Wired Magazine, Scientific American, NPR, Fox News, ABC News, just to name a few. Her company, by the way, uBiome, is in the business of making microbiome testing accessible to millions, if not billions of people. Basically, what you do is you take a swab of your cheek and or a swab of a piece of toilet paper, you send it in, and you get detailed results of exactly what kind of bacteria are in your body, how much are there, what they're doing, how they're feeling. You're able to learn from this information how much more effectively your body metabolizes different kinds of nutrients and see how sensitive you are to different things like caffeine, learn about steroid biosynthesis in your body. It's all, to be honest, pretty darn cool. So in this episode, we're not only going to learn why all of this is so important, but we're also going to learn how you can promote the general health of your microbiome. And we're going to talk about the power of citizen science, which, as you guys know, I'm a big advocate of. And we're going to have a lot of other fun and laughs. So I'm very excited to introduce you all to Jessica Richman. Jessica, welcome to the Becoming Superhuman podcast. I am so glad to catch up with you because I am actually a customer of yours and I'm really excited to ask all those nitty-gritty questions.
Sounds great. I'm looking forward to answering them as much as I can. Anyway.
Yeah, as much as possible. Jessica, in the intro, I tried to cover just a little bit about you, but I'm sure I missed a lot of it. That tends to happen with, any of our guests who have this rich, diverse background and so much interesting stuff to share. I can never cover it in the 2 minutes. So give me a bit of background on yourself, who you are, where you've been, what you've done, and what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So my background is I was an entrepreneur from a pretty young age. just started a company after high school and then sold it, and then went back to school. I went to Stanford. I studied economics and computer science, and then got a fellowship to go to Oxford to study computational social science, which is basically computer science and economics. And I really felt a lack in the studies that I was doing at the time. The math was interesting, the subject matter was interesting, but I just really felt like I wasn't going to have that big of an impact, even if I found the most amazing methods for discovering, network connections that, overturned the entire study of economics. That was kind of the future dream that I had at the time. It really wasn't going to have the kind of immediate impact that I wanted to. It would be much more of a long-term pursuit. So I decided to turn the same sort of skills and experience toward the field of genomics and work in this kind of crazy new field, which was called the microbiome, to better understand how the microbiome affects our health, how we could change the practice of medicine by using information about the microbiome that was analyzed, larger data sets, and that was analyzed in a new way.
So fill our audience in. When people talk about the microbiome, what does that mean exactly?
Yeah, so the microbiome is a biome, and I think the word is very carefully chosen. So a biome is an environmental niche, right? So a biome is a forest or a jungle or a desert. It's a place where different kinds of organisms live in ecology. And in a microbiome, we have different kinds of environments, tiny environments on our bodies. So there's a different microbiome on the inside of your mouth than from the outside of your cheek, or a different microbiome between your toes than there is on the top of your foot, or in different spots in your gut, there's a different microbiome. And I love the way that word is constructed, because I think it's just it's a good description, not just of what's there, but also of sort of how to think about it, which is to think about the microbiome as being a place where lots of organisms live. Because the big discovery in the microbiome is that our bodies are covered with ecological niches that different kinds of organisms live. And by understanding what lives in those niches in these different places and what they do, we can help to better understand human health, and also from a therapeutic side, help to address human health by altering the bacteria that live in that region.
That's a fantastic explanation. I can tell you've been an entrepreneur for many, many years because you've got that elevator pitch down pat.
Thank you. I don't know. That's more my just falling in love with the science of it. Like, it's just fascinating that we are actually, the earth is the body that all of us live on. We're the body that all these bacteria live on. And I think it's just the term itself is such a beautiful metaphor.
It is. It has a beautiful etymology about it. I like also that in your description, you started to go into why this is important. So I want to push on that point a little bit and ask, why is this important? How does this affect our health? I mean, what is at stake? What is at risk if our biome gets out of balance?
That's a really good question. So what we're discovering is that the microbiome relates to just about everything in human health. And when you look at kind of the laundry list of different things, it's really shocking. You sort of everything from cancer to dandruff. And you would think, what could this it sounds like snake oil, right? It sounds like what could possibly have an effect in all these different things. But once you understand at a deeper level, it makes sense that, the microbiome are these organisms that live on us. So they're basically biomarkers. They can tell us what's going on in different parts of our body. And in some areas and in some health conditions, that can be indicative, so that can be diagnostic. And then in other areas, it can be therapeutic, because we can say, here's what the microbiome is, this is unhealthy, and this is how we can change it. Now, I must say that all the science is very early, and we don't have a cancer diagnostic, or we don't have, I don't want to make that claim, but the evidence is there that there are some relationships between the microbiome and human health, and that we can use that data to develop these interesting technologies in the future.
Wow, that's really cool. And, another thing that I have often thought about, and one of the reasons that I actually did uBiome testing myself, is someone explained to me that actually your body is not doing most of the digestive work that's going on. I mean, you're physically breaking down food and you're churning it and combining it with acid. But in terms of actually getting nutrients into your body, that's all non-human cells. Is that kind of correct, more or less?
I don't know if I'd say it's all non-human cells. I would say it's non-human cells in partnership with human cells. There's a lot of interesting data about handing off nutrients between the microbiome and the gut epithelia. So this is really interesting. So definitely there are certain foods that only bacteria can break down. This is what prebiotic fiber is, right? So this is prebiotic fiber. It's called that because you can't digest it, but bacteria can. So it's basically fish food for your bacteria that live in your gut, right? There are also certain compounds that bacteria can synthesize that humans can't synthesize. And those, it's really interesting. There's kind of this handoff of those compounds from, the bacteria that live on the lining of the gut to the gut that you then use in your body, right? So like a sterile human would suffer from not having access to those nutrients because they wouldn't be able to get it from the microbiome. So if you think about sort of symbiotic relationships you learned about in, third grade biology or whatever, where there's like the bird that picks the teeth of the alligator. I don't remember the example very well, but basically it's very clear that these are commensal bacteria, that there's a symbiosis going on where they're doing what they need. We're providing them with an environment to live in, and they're providing us with nutrients and breaking down foods and manufacturing other substances that we need. And it's this whole complex, interesting space.
Right. So I feel like we should probably explain to our audience a little bit about uBiome in the sense that what you guys offer is at-home biome testing, right? You swab a little here, swab a little there, send it in, and get a full report of everything that's going on in your body, ratios, percentages, how you relate to other people. So I don't know if we established that early before, but essentially that's the service. And then if I can kind of project, I imagine that where you guys are going is going to also be around actionable items.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So our existing product is very nerdy. It's for quantified self people who want to see which bacteria are in their gut, how those compare to other people, and how those compare to the existing literature. That's kind of what we've had. What we're building are products that are much more kind of a score around your microbiome, much more sort of user-friendly for people who are not microbiome enthusiasts and quantified selfers and body hackers. And also this may be more useful to them too. Just much more clear, here are the actions you can take in regard to your microbiome. So that's kind of the first step there. And then the second piece is that we're developing some clinical tests, which will be ordered by a doctor, paid for by insurance by people who have that in the US, that will then allow people to get medical information that they can then share with their doctor from their microbiome. And we haven't announced specifically what those tests are, how they're going to work. That's all still under development, but we will be releasing them. We have a clinical lab set up, and I'm really excited about that because there's a lot of actionable information that it's best to be told in the context of a medical relationship.
Oh, that's exciting. So
I know. I'm really excited about that too. I think it'll really expand the reach of what we can do. I mean, I think what we're doing is really cool. We get to gather data for the first time about a new organ of the human body. We get to, make comparisons that have never been made before, but we don't have the opportunity to give, medical information to people except in the context of a clinical lab. So I'm excited to get there.
Right. I did get my report and I was like, oh, that's really interesting. I synthesize this faster than most people and I do this slower than most people and I have more of this. And I was like, okay, now what? Yeah. Exactly.
That's something we're working hard on. I think a lot of it is that this is really new science. So we have to be very careful. One of the things we've been very conscientious about, and one of our advisors, Dr. Jonathan Eisen at UC Davis, kind of gives out the Microbiome Hype Award. And that's something we want to be very careful never to earn. We don't want to come out with things that are kind of half-baked science and say, look, we can tell you, exactly what foods you need to eat tomorrow. And then your microbiome will be perfect. Like we want to make sure that we do this in a really responsible way. So that just takes longer. And I'm a bit frustrated with it too. But I think that, what we're aiming to do with the next version of our consumer practice, give much more data about what we can tell you that you can do and what we can tell you about how you rank with other people in a way that's simple rather than complex. Because right now it's like you said, it's, your cell mitosis happens faster than other people. Well, okay. What are you supposed to do with that?
Sure.
So we want to kind of break that down into language that's much more simple for people to understand.
Sure. And I imagine, for existing customers, it's almost as if additional value will be added after the fact. I mean, one day people will log in and there will be a ton of...
Yeah, I mean, this is not something you pay more for. Once you have one sample with us, you get the benefit of all future science about the microbiome that we can bring to bear on it. You can get additional samples that let you compare the present to the past, but you won't have to pay extra. It'll just be part of us updating, just making our product continuously better over time.
Yeah. Although that does beg the question, I mean, how much variation and along what timeframes does the microbiome change? I mean, is this something that people need to get done every year, every 6 months, every quarter?
So it's a really good question. So a lot of people have monthly subscriptions. And the reason for that is that people are trying various experiments on their bodies. So they are saying, let's say, doing a Whole30, which is sort of cutting basically an elimination diet where you can have dairy and gluten and processed foods and all sorts of stuff. People often are taking prebiotics or probiotics and want to see the effect. Mm-hmm. It's kind of a way of monitoring yourself. We kind of call it like a Fitbit for your gut, basically. So that's why people would sort of monitor on a regular basis. If there's a sort of a triggering event, like someone taking antibiotics or someone, having a rapid dietary change, you can really see the change immediately. Like you can see the change within a day for antibiotics. But as a sort of, if you're not changing anything about yourself and you don't have a condition that flares up occasionally that you're trying to track, generally what people do is, they sample when as needed, like when there is some event that they know is going to happen, or they kind of keep a kit in reserve for an event that happens that they weren't predicting, that will then let them check the difference before and after.
Very cool.
To sum up, it's mostly driven by before and after something, whether that's self-driven or that's just something that happens naturally.
Sure. So on the topic of kind of testing and tweaking and trying to improve the microbiome, I'm sure a lot of people in the audience are wondering what contributes to the health of the microbiome, and what kind of things are you guys going to be able to recommend? So I guess the broader question is, what is the difference in practical behaviors and lifestyle between a person who has a quote unquote healthy microbiome and someone who has a less healthy one?
That's a really good question. And we all start at different places. And one thing to make very clear is that there isn't a single healthy gut microbiome. It's a really complex system. And we can't say, you are the healthy one and yours is unhealthy. There are many different kinds of healthy. But one of the things that we've learned that's really interesting is about the importance of prebiotic fiber. So, and it kind of makes sense. Once you know that and you kind of backtrack it and think it through, it makes a lot of sense that taking probiotics means that you're taking an organism and you're hoping that it will survive your mouth, your stomach, get to the right place in the gut, take root in the community there, grow and spread, and not grow and spread in a bad way, right? Like you're hoping that this plant that you're transplanting into the rainforest is going to take over part of the rainforest, right? And you're kind of dropping it from a helicopter at 10,000 feet or something, right? Like that's sort of
it's a great analogy.
It might not, right? But prebiotic fiber makes a lot of sense in that you're basically dropping food on the jungle, on the rainforest, and seeing if it will grow, right? So being able to, drop food means that the organisms that can benefit from that food will eat it and then will grow. And you don't have to be as precise, and it's not alive, so you don't have to keep it alive as you're dropping it in. And, it's food, so it's used to going through your stomach. There's like a lot of really good reasons why that works better. And so there's a lot of really interesting combinations of prebiotic fiber that we're looking into as beneficial for our users, because there are different kinds of food for different bacteria, and figuring out, what people can eat that will make them more healthy is good. In sort of the short term, though, there are a lot of foods that are known to have prebiotic fiber, everything from artichokes to bananas, chicory fiber. You can sort of find them at your local health food store. And at this point, we're still doing research into which ones are the best ones and for who and all that sort of stuff. But there's a lot of, what we know indicates that there's a lot of value in prebiotic fiber.
And just to reiterate from what you said earlier, prebiotic fiber means that it's something that our body doesn't actually break down, so it makes it intact into the intestines and therefore into the microbiome.
Yeah, well, that's one way of looking at it. And also, we don't break it down in the intestines ourselves, right? So it's food for the right bacteria so that they have the food that they need to make the nutrients that we need, so that they have the food that they need not to compete with our human cells for resources. They have the food they need so that they grow, and there's no niche available for pathogens to come in and grow. There are a lot of reasons why you want to feed them so that they will then, do good things for you and stay in the way of organisms that might do harm.
Keep the team happy, as it is.
Yeah, keep the team happy. Exactly.
I love it. Let me ask, what are your thoughts on kind of over sanitation? I mean, the moms walking around with Purell and sanitizing hands and washing everything so thoroughly. I mean, do you have any thoughts on that? Is there any research on that?
That's a really good question. So there is research on that. I mean, there's this whole idea of the hygiene hypothesis, which is that the reason we have so many autoimmune disorders that we have now is, because we're too clean and we don't have the diversity of microbiomes that we used to have. I actually think that this is just my own theory about this after the reading that I've done, and I haven't done the research to support this, but my thought on this is that I doubt it's just pure cleanliness. Right? Because it seems like because there's such a diverse microbiome on so many different objects, you pick up a cup and you have a drink and that cup has a microbiome all over it. I found it's like, I don't think we're actually as clean as we think we are. I think it's chemicals that are specifically designed to kill bacteria that are doing the job of effectively killing bacteria and reducing the diversity that we encounter on a daily basis. So I think it's less, not having dirt in your house and much more taking antibiotics frequently, like you said, Purell on your hands every day, where you're sort of killing off all the bacteria that are vulnerable to Purell. And, 5 seconds later, your hand is covered in bacteria, but it may be a different bacteria than you had before you used the Purell. This is kind of sometimes the hygiene hypothesis is we are too clean in the sense that we bathe too often, for example. But there's a microbiome in the water that we are bathing in, right? So it's not that. I think it's that we're using a lot of chemicals that were specifically designed to kill bacteria, and they do that indiscriminately. And I think kind of the future writ large, as this knowledge becomes much more clear and as new products are developed, is not developing better ways to kill bacteria, but better ways to, now that we understand them much better, we can use DNA sequencing to see exactly what's there, make better products that will then selectively kill certain bacteria rather than others, selectively grow certain bacteria. So you could have a prebiotic hand cream, for example, selectively encourage certain things and not others on a more personalized basis. So I think there's a lot of room to go between we're too clean to, how actually to much more scientific and targeted way grow the diversity that we want.
Right. I'm specifically going to avoid a discussion of antibiotics because I feel like you probably could talk about that for hours and hours, and I'm sure you have a very strong opinion on it.
I mean, let me just say one thing about it, which is that antibiotics were one of the greatest inventions of their time, right? Like antibiotics have saved millions of lives. You and I would probably not be here if antibiotics didn't exist. However, nothing is without trade-offs, and, we're kind of seeing the impact of much more indiscriminate use, too much of a good thing, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to touch on that actually a little bit because I know, as you said, there's no one picture of the quote unquote healthy microbiome, but there's certainly a probably gradient, you could say, of people who are suffering from consequences and people who are not. What percentage of people out there, according to the data you guys have collected, have some kind of problem or deficiency or imbalance in their microbiome? Or is there such a thing?
So what's interesting. So we have self-reported data about specific health conditions, and we have, self-reported data about health, right? And most of the people using our product have some kind of health condition, or they simply just don't feel healthy, on a self-reported basis. I think we have a very skewed and biased sample.
Yeah.
Obviously, we have people who are interested in gut health, like often people who don't have any concern with gut health, like wouldn't be interested in using a product that addresses gut health. So I wouldn't, extrapolate that to the population. But I would say that from statistics around irritable bowel syndrome, right, which is like the syndrome of problems that happen in the gut, gas, bloating, diarrhea over a prolonged period of time of unknown cause and of unknown cure, that the number of people that have that is about 10% of the US population. So that's really high.
Just that one thing.
Right. And those are people diagnosed with IBS, not people who have, intermittent gut issues and no one knows what they are. And I think it's probably everyone to some degree, right? Like who among us has not had some kind of gut issue that, went away. So we didn't really even go to a doctor for it necessarily, but we still have that problem. So I think it's pretty rampant. The thing is that the microbiome is very resilient though, right? So in most of us, you have a gut problem, maybe you have food poisoning, maybe, you eat something that doesn't agree with you, which is sort of a way of saying, a microbiome disturbance. And for most of us, that goes away and then our microbiome bounces back because it's a rainforest, right? It's a community of organisms that is very resilient to temporary problems. But in some of us, it doesn't. And trying to figure out how and why and what to do about that is really fascinating.
I'm tempted to ask the question, how can people in the audience know if they have a microbiome issue? But then I realized that almost anything could be a microbiome issue. I mean, if you have like gas issues, if you have nausea, if you have acne, all those things could be different issues in the different microbiomes in the body. What are some big ones though?
So I think there's sort of two categories in the way I think about this. So one are things that everybody knows are microbiome issues, right? So things like acne, for example, right? That's a bacterial infection. Things that are thought of as infection are basically microbiome issues that everyone acknowledges are microbiome issues. So acne is a microbiome issue. Dandruff is a microbiome issue. Food poisoning is a microbiome issue, if you want to think about it that way, right? So things that sort of that involve pathogens are just sort of obviously microbiome issues. Then there are health conditions that, as we're discovering more about the microbiome and its correlations, may in fact be, and I don't know if I like the term microbiome issue because it's so vague, like you said, just about anything can be a microbiome issue, but we'll just run with that. Things that we previously did not think were infectious disease may turn out to be infectious disease, meaning they may turn out to be some kind of disturbance in the microbiome. And, there's some research to suggest this. There's nothing where we can say, we didn't know that autism or schizophrenia or depression or any of these things were microbiome issues. And oh my God, all of them are. Like, I wouldn't make that claim. But I would say that there's some really interesting studies in mice, for example, where anxious mice can be made less anxious by giving them a fecal transplant from less anxious mice. This was sort of Jeff Gordon's work. Or mice can be made obese by giving them a fecal transplant from an obese human. So That's super interesting, right? Because it may be that conditions that we thought were really far afield from anything having to do with bacteria can actually either be caused or cured by bacteria. And none of the studies that we have yet say, okay, here is how you cause depression in a human by giving them a microbiome. That hasn't been done yet. Or, here's how you cure depression by giving them a microbiome. But there's some really interesting research that kind of suggests that that may be true in some people and that you might be able to either detect problems or cure them. And I think that the real canonical example of this is obviously H. pylori, stomach ulcers, which were thought to be caused by stress, but are actually a bacterial infection. And we now know that. Like that is scientific fact at this point. So I think it's a real, and all the trouble that that a particular scientist had to go through to prove that what is now sort of an obvious point that many things can be infectious that were previously not is really a shame, but it's glad that we all sort of benefit from that at this point.
It's so fascinating, a little bit depressing, but so fascinating. I mean, I remember looking into candidiasis, which is, really super common in Western diets. I mean, really common. And if anyone out there is wondering, like, stick your tongue out. If it's white, you have candidiasis. And that's a lot of people. And, you look at the symptoms and there may be a link between ADD and candidiasis, depression, brain fog, Alzheimer's. I mean, all these scary things that could just be caused by this imbalance of the microbiome in the mouth and in the gut.
Yeah, so I think that's actually a really good example where we don't know at this point if sugar causes both candidiasis and depression, right, through some mechanism of like low blood sugar changes or something like that, or if it's a self-reinforcing loop where sugar initially causes candidiasis, which then causes depression. I don't want to speak to causality because we don't know the causality. But what's really interesting, I think, in terms of the microbiome is that often you don't need to know causality. You just need to know that these two things frequently co-occur. And that's enough often to say, okay, this might be caused by something that I don't know the cause, but it might be different than what I think it is. And it might have something to do with the microbiome.
Yeah, I'm super excited to see this really hit the mainstream and become more researched, because years ago when I was looking into candidiasis and I had some whiteness on my tongue, basically there's not a lot out there for how you can fix this stuff. I mean, the research has not been done.
There's all this stuff that's sort of viewed as very fringy by the mainstream medical system, like candidiasis or leaky gut or small intestine bacterial overgrowth. I mean, to me, anyways, it absolutely exists, right? The question is, what does it cause? How do you treat it? Like all these things are still questions, but whether or not it exists, I think is really not open to debate, especially, and this is one of my passions in this, is that through citizen science or the concerns of actual people, you're concerned looking at your tongue being like, this may be implicated in something that's wrong, can be brought into the healthcare system much more broadly. And sort of you can take concerns and questions of ordinary people who don't happen to have a PhD and work in a research lab, but who don't happen to have an MD, and turn them from anecdotes into data that then the healthcare system and the medical establishment can use. That's just something I'm really passionate about, because I feel like so much data is lost. As you know, we all suffer privately with whatever it is, and we all generate interesting hypotheses about why. And then that data just never gets into a scientific journal, ever.
Right. And as another thing that I want to bring up actually is the power of, private companies doing what you guys are doing as a service. I would venture to say, I mean, it's probably a given, but you guys are doing the largest ever collection of microbiome samples on the planet, which then can do the most statistically significant research against that. I mean, studies typically have 100 to 500 people over who knows how much time period. You guys probably have tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of samples already. Is that something that you can speak to?
No, absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up. This is really my passion doing this, is that by gathering this data set, we can develop discoveries, and business allows science to exist on a greater scale than would be possible in sort of the grant funded system that we have. And there's sort of nothing wrong. I mean, I'm happy that the government gives grants for science. That's one of the best things, in my opinion, the government pays for. It's really valuable. I would never want that not to exist. But I think there's also a role for other, more faster actors, basically, in the way that entrepreneurs are, to develop scientific methods and to gather data on a really large scale that can then be used to develop scientific conclusions. That's exactly that. So this is the opportunity that we have. And this is why I'm doing this, right? Like, this is not my field. I didn't go to school to be a microbiologist, but I just saw this possibility of being able to take something that is, at its infancy and make it grow up a lot faster. In a good way, I guess, so that it could turn into something useful that people could use as fast as possible.
Do people often make comparisons between uBiome and 23andMe? And if so, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, so we do get that a lot. And I think we're the same and we're different. So we're different, obviously, because what we're doing is studying the microbiome, which by its nature has different affordances, I guess. So by its nature, it is, it changes over time. It's much more complex. It's much newer in terms of our understanding of it. So it's different in that way. I think also from a business perspective, we've learned a lot from 23andMe. They were a pioneer in the space. And, we've taken a much more, what the right phrase is, but a much more sort of traditional approach in a lot of ways. We had an IRB right away. We're setting up a clinical lab so we can do things in a more clinical way. We're kind of more compliant with regulation would be one way of putting it. And another way of putting it is we sort of learn from their mistakes and we want to make sure that we're doing things the right way. So I think there's that. And I also think that society has changed really dramatically. If you think about when 23andMe first started, this idea of, the quantified self, there wasn't even a word for that. And all of these companies, not just us, but, every wearable and every, tracking device and every app on your phone that lets you track your diet or your movement or whatever it is growing up in an environment where everybody knows what this is. And at the beginning of 23andMe, that was not true. And so I think those are the primary differences. But I think in terms of philosophy and ethos, we're not exactly the same, but we're both the same in our desire to take data and make it useful to people as fast as possible about genomics. So you could say we definitely have that in common.
And how big is uBiome today, if you're at liberty to discuss?
Yeah. So in terms of, people measure this all different ways. We've raised money from venture capital. At this point, we raised $6.5 million. We have 25 employees. We're kind of at that, late seed, early Series A kind of stage for people who are in the know in that Silicon Valley way. And we're poised for a lot of growth because, like you said, we have this large data set. We have a lot of technology that we patented. We filed over 65 patents at this point. And that's because we're the first in the space and we're really moving quickly to consolidate our lead there and make sure that we can kind of be the company that does this piece of development on the microbiome. There are many other ways to get knowledge out of the microbiome. And from therapeutics to cosmetics to development of different kinds of foods. There are a lot of things that we're not doing quite consciously because we are trying to, sort of own our piece of this ecosystem, not to be too, not to belabor the metaphor too much, but we're kind of choosing this piece. And there are a lot of other ways that the microbiome, which is this huge discovery, right? There won't just be one company that does everything there is to do in the microbiome. There'll be a lot of ways that, that comes into products that people can use.
How do you think this goes from being as you said, a geeky, niche kind of quantified self people thing to something that everyone does like blood testing, or hopefully everyone does like blood testing?
Right. So I think it has to do with a few things. So one is for the science of the microbiome in terms of what we know that we can tell people. Another piece is sort of development of the industry. We were one of the very first companies in the space, and that was just 3 years ago. So if you think about other industries that are 3 years old, completely new industries that are 3 years old, there's really, it's very much at the beginning, and this will be a very different landscape in 10 years. From a product perspective, though, I would say it has to do with sort of gathering the data as we have that we need to take this into useful products and services the average person can understand without wanting to know anything about bacteria.
Right. And I think that's such an interesting point when that happens, where I just log in and it says, hey, you need to eat more cruciferous greens and you really need to start taking a probiotic or eat more fermented foods.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Or telling you what you don't need to do, right? Because we can all say, of course, you need to eat fermented foods, take prebiotics, take probiotics, and don't take antibiotics sparingly, right? Like that's the general advice for everyone. And you could just put that and maybe everyone would be happy that you're telling them what they need to know. But you want to make sure that not only do you say that, but you have something where you tell people something specific to them, which is kind of the interesting part.
I actually want to take the opportunity while I have you on the line to ask you about probiotics and prebiotics and stuff like that, because I know a lot of the stuff off the shelf that's not refrigerated is kind of BS. As you said, it doesn't even make it past the stomach acid. So what products are out there that are really good? I mean, have you seen samples where people use a specific brand and you say, wow, this person has a really diverse microbiome?
I wish I could just say, everyone should take this one thing. We have a lot of research that we're doing in-house on that, and I probably shouldn't comment on some of it because publications and patents and all that sort of stuff. I mean, there's some very interesting things that you can find about which probiotics work in whom and why. But I would say very broadly that probiotics work very differently in different people. And I think this is something that And I guess this is true for all supplements and all drugs, but it's easy for us to see with probiotics because we just see what's living in your gut. So I guess I would say that I couldn't say this is the one probiotic that works for everyone. I think the best thing to do is to take what you think might be the best based on what you need for your gut and then test and see. And obviously I would say that because I run a microbiome testing company, but I actually think that's the best thing to do because otherwise how would you know if it worked or not unless you could see what's going on in your microbiome and how it changes because it is different per person. And this is kind of just an endorsement of personalized medicine very generally in that I wish we could do this for all drugs that don't have anything to do with the microbiome. Like, wouldn't you want to know if your blood pressure medication or whatever is working for you? Right now, there's no way. I mean, I guess with blood pressure, you can sort of check that your blood pressure has changed. But with many other things, it's sort of hard to tell if it's actually there and doing what's it's supposed to be doing.
Sure. Although a lot of probiotics have kind of the same 4 or 5 organisms, can you speak a little bit to that? Like, which ones are people typically needing to supplement?
That's a really good question. So there's an interesting mismatch here where what's in probiotics is what is in certain foods, not necessarily what humans need, right? So there are hundreds of genuses of bacteria in the gut, and there are only 2 genuses used in probiotics presently. So there's a lot of opportunity there for other probiotics that have currently not been developed to be developed, right? But I would say, yeah. So what's in probiotics are sort of lactobacillus and family sorts of microbiomes. And what you may need may be different, but it may be that, of the available probiotics, this is kind of the only one that's available for you to take for your gut. So yeah, I wish there was a much greater breadth of probiotics for different kinds of microbiomes, but I think that's something that doesn't exist yet, but will in the future.
It's pretty funny. You can go online today, right now, and there are companies where you can customize your own nutrition bar or trail mix based on exactly what your needs are. And yet you can't do that for something so important as probiotics. That's a great startup idea for someone in the audience.
That is a good startup idea.
Like, just customize your own and then hit a subscribe button, and every month you get a bottle full of, I would assume not pills, because I've heard a lot of kind of negative things around probiotics that are not refrigerated.
Right. And maybe it's a supply chain issue that it's hard to do.
Or maybe it's a stomach acid issue where, those are the 3 or 4 or the 2 genuses that actually make it through the digestive tract.
Right. Some people are doing it the other way, though. This is, I mean, I learn something really interesting every day about what people do. And there's all kinds of crazy and maybe not so crazy things that people do to try to improve their health. So people are doing probiotics the other way.
From the other side.
From the other side. They're kind of on the wild side of probiotics, and they use them to bypass the stomach acid problem and also, kind of the living cultures problem. They want to make sure that if what they get is alive when they get it, it stays alive till it gets to the right spot. Right.
And, I was shocked when I read about some of the stuff that is happening with fecal transplants. I mean, you talked about making skinny mice fat, but they've cured depression in people with fecal transplants from happy people. I mean, mind blowing.
Yeah. And what excites me and frustrates me is, of course, that's fascinating, right? Like, who wouldn't want that? Especially if it could be used sort of as needed for people who, if you have a terrible event in your life that is going to depress you, you could prophylactically take a fecal transplant to help yourself. I mean, there's just so many interesting applications of this, right? But the thing is that fecal transplants in the US, at least, are only approved for one health condition, which is Clostridium difficile infections that are not responsive to antibiotics. So you kind of can't do that broad experimentation except in a, very controlled research setting. But this is the citizen science piece. The citizen scientists can do whatever they want with their own poop, and they can find really interesting things that could be beneficial to the rest of us. So it's exciting. It's also frustrating because I'd love to see this research progress to turn into something that, something that we all give away for free could turn out to be this fantastic help for very serious conditions.
What I love so much about this gig is how many people get to talk about poop with the CEO of a venture-backed startup. Like, this doesn't happen. Like, this is really not
funny. They all get to talk to me about poop.
Like, on the list of things in kindergarten when they were like, do you want to be an astronaut, a veterinarian? You're like, no, I want to pitch investors about poop. Like, that's...
Well, yeah, we have some really funny investor meetings where some people are very squeamish and some people just really get into it. And they're like, so tell me more.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think it's really, really cool. And if we really want to make this progress, we got to get over the squeamishness. I mean, I'm writing a book right now on endocrine system optimization just through the N=1 perspective. I mean, here are 100 things that I've tried. Yeah. Here's what's worked. Here's what hasn't. And at some point, like, I'm going to have to talk about masturbation. I'm going to have to talk about sex. I'm going to have to talk about multiple partners and how that plays in. And you kind of have to get over the squeamishness if you want to get things done.
Right. That's right. That's right. And for other people to learn from what you're providing. I mean, this is kind of a pitch rather than a podcast thing, but it would be really cool once you come out with that, if you have some interesting protocols to share them with people so that other people can try it and we can kind of track the experiment.
Yeah, precisely.
Citizen science approach. I think there's so much, N=1 experiments are, of course, limited and, wouldn't be respected scientifically, but they're a good starting point. They're a really good starting point for hypotheses that then get tested. And then you have a group of people who follow along at home and then tell you what the results are.
Exactly.
This is kind of what we wanted to do with uBiome. I think there are many other areas in which this could be valuable and people just aren't doing it yet. And I think they should be, because microbiome is not the only application of this. There are many ways to take a citizen science approach, come up with a good hypothesis and test it in a really large population.
Exactly. And this is such important stuff, which is why I want to ask you actually, tell us a little bit about the Microbiome Fund.
Oh, yeah. So this was an interesting thing. So we just get a lot of inbound interest from our existing investors and from prospective investors who say, I'd love to invest in something at the really early seed stage. We're kind of beyond that at this point, but, small amounts of money into brand new startups that are doing interesting things. What do you think about this idea or that idea? And, we really have a lot of expertise in this area and we'd really love to share it. And AngelList, which has been fantastic to us in many ways, just makes it really easy to set up a fund. So I've had people ask, so what kind of legal documents did you have? Did you set up an office and hire people? We didn't do any of that. Basically, you go on AngelList, you set up a fund, which is like a web page.
Right.
And then when people join on, they commit a certain amount of capital. And then when you want to invest, you send it to them. And if they're interested, they click a button and then you have a fund. I mean, this is sort of off topic of science and the microbiome and all that stuff, but AngelList has really made possible organizing investing in a totally different way. And it's made it so that people who have expertise like us don't have to wait till the end of our careers to start running around trying to gather millions of dollars of capital in order to then think about being able to use our knowledge to direct investment. We can do it in a really short period of time. So the idea is, as I have my day job, my co-founder has his day job, but the idea is that when we get interesting opportunities and when we get investors that are interested in those kinds of opportunities, we can just matchmake. And as uBiome, we can also be helpful to those companies and possibly partner with them.
That's incredible. And as I look at it, you guys have already raised $82,000.
Yeah, most of that came in the first day. It's one of those things where kind of the magic of the internet means that we could have a data set with tens of thousands and soon hundreds of thousands of people, and you can start a fund with $80,000 in it, and all this can happen super quickly. And that's all for the good, I think. There's a lot of friction in both of these systems that makes it so that it's hard to do the things that are best for the world scientifically and in the sense of, directing investment in better ways than you could otherwise.
Incredible. Just transitioning kind of towards the end of the interview, Jessica, I want to ask you, what is one question that I should have asked you that I didn't?
Oh, that's a good question.
It's a really tough one, I know.
Yeah. So there's interesting stuff about the microbiome and there's interesting stuff about science and about entrepreneurship. I wish I had a preformed question for that one. What's a question you ask a lot of other people?
Oh, we'll get to those. I mean, what's one thing you would want the audience to know about the microbiome that didn't come up?
Well, so one thing is, I think that people's habits are trailing a bit behind where the science is at this point. Like, it's pretty clear, all the things that you mentioned, about building microbiome diversity. People who are kind of geeks about this do those things, but I think in the mainstream, it's not common for people to do them, but I think it should be. So I think the one thing would be, eat prebiotic fiber and try not to take antibiotics as much as possible. Like sort of that chain of advice. There are many different ways that different doctors have different versions of this, but I think that that's something that almost anyone can do and can be really beneficial.
Awesome. So that leads us nicely into the kind of questions that we ask everyone. The first of which is, if you could assign to our audience one piece of homework that they're going to do while they wait for next week's episode, what would that piece of homework be? Whether it's maybe trying a new food, taking a good hard look at their poop, whatever it is.
Well, I would never discourage anyone for taking a look at their poop. I mean, it could be very informative. No, I mean, actually, there's a paper that I love that is not directly related to the microbiome, but everyone I share it with just loves this paper. And it's about weird people, WEIRD, which is Western, educated. It's sort of like all of us that are kind of unusual in the world, that we're, Western, educated, rich, democratic. I forget what the I is for, but so just Google like weird people. And it's a sociology paper actually about how science focuses on the wrong people, because most of us are not all of those things. Most humans are not all those things. And everyone I share the paper with loves it. And I just think it really was part of the inspiration for uBiome, in the sense that we started our campaign globally. Our initial Indiegogo campaign was global. And part of our mission here is to not just do this for rich, Western, educated people who can afford to buy our kits, but also for a much broader population.
That is awesome. And I think that's the reason I was so excited both to be a customer of you guys and to have you guys sponsor an episode of the show. Because I was like, man, these guys are doing something that's so much bigger than just the let's teach rich white programmers what's wrong with them.
Right, exactly. When probably nothing's wrong with them and they'll probably be fine either way. Exactly.
Right. So the next kind of common question that we ask, what are some books that you've most recommended or given as gifts?
Ooh, that is such a good question. So I answered this question for Tim Ferriss, and I think I answered it wrong. I answered it as Ernest Hemingway, right? And the idea was that I love Hemingway. I've given Hemingway books to a lot of people. But the number one book I've actually given and recommended to most people is a book called Limbo. It's written by a New York Times reporter whose father was a bricklayer and grew up really working class. And it's about sort of that transition between social classes and how people who grew up in kind of a working class background, which I did, who then find themselves in a very rarefied world, whether that's Stanford and Oxford in my case, or the reporting for the New York Times in the case of the author, and what that means for people's lives. And I've talked to so many people who kind of find themselves lost, lost as a Rhodes Scholar or whatever, who kind of need this understanding that social class is so important, how that affects people and, colors all of our thinking. And it's sort of like a different language that people learn. So I recommend that to a lot of people. And if anyone in the audience has had that experience of changing social classes, whether up or down or sideways in a different country, for example, it's really valuable to know that that's a type of culture shock.
That's fantastic. So we'll go ahead and put that one for sure in the blog post, and hopefully people will use our link. We'll also put the Weird People article in the blog post.
Oh, thank you. That's great.
Yeah, of course. And then the last thing I want to put in is where do we send people? I mean, would you want us to direct people to uBiome? Do you have a personal page with more info about you?
Please send them to uBiome. I mean, I'm like the least important part of this. So I would love for people to go to ubiome.com, ubiome.com, check out what we have to offer. We often do studies where we give away free kits. So there's a studies page you can click on for people who have specific health conditions who can get, or not always health conditions, but habits or health conditions or lifestyle factors where they can get free kits. And people can, of course, buy kits there.
Cool. And I want to give you guys a plug for anyone listening from outside the US. I had a very seamless experience. I mean, you might think it would be an issue to send a swab of poop around the world, but I had no issue. The Israeli customs didn't seem to mind. So
yeah, we comply with all the IATA regulations. This is something we paid a lot of attention to at the beginning. There are a lot of rules around what you can send, internationally, and we comply with all of them. And it should be really seamless.
Indeed. International poop matters too.
International. Now there's a book title, International Poop.
Jessica, our last question of the day, one that we like to ask everyone is, if people take away one lesson from this episode and they carry it with them for the rest of their lives, what would you like that to be?
I would like that message to be that bacteria are not our enemies, and it's by taking care of our microbiome that we can improve our health. There's kind of this myth in a lot of medicine that everything's a war and we're doing battle and we're, killing the bad guys and that's going to make us healthy. But actually what makes us most healthy is sort of encouraging the ecosystem around us to be healthy. So if people could just take away one thing, it would be that the, bacteria are not our enemies. They are our friends, and we should learn how to cultivate them and sort of build a better garden rather than, carpet bombing them.
That is a fantastic note to end on, and also a fantastic metaphor for kind of any biome and any ecology that we tend to be at war with and really should be preserving for our own benefit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jessica, it's been such a pleasure chatting with you. I learned a ton, and I really do hope we keep in touch. Thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, you too. Thanks so much for having me on. This is great. Have a great day.
Pleasure. Take care.
All right, super friends, that's it for this week's episode. We hope you really, really enjoyed it and learned a ton of applicable stuff that can help you go out there and overcome the impossible? If so, please do us a favor and leave us a review on iTunes or Stitcher or however you found this podcast. In addition to that, we are always looking for great guest posts on the blog or awesome guests right here on the podcast. So if you know somebody, or you are somebody, or you have thought of somebody who would be a great fit for the show or for our blog, please reach out to us either on Twitter or by email. Our email is info@becomingasuperhuman.com. Thanks so much.
Thanks for tuning in to the Becoming Superhuman podcast. For more great skills and strategies, or for links to any of the resources mentioned in this episode, visit www.becomingasuperhuman.com/podcast. We'll see you next time.